This 50th anniversary was a time for men of Alpha to celebrate their accomplishments and to plan for the future. Alpha's leadership was having an impact as African American progress gained momentum.
By this time, there was widespread advocacy of equality, and I can only say that historically it goes back surely to the early days of this organization, but that by the middle of the 50s and into the 60s, it is very, very widespread.
Alphas also led African Americans in gaining a foothold in elected positions in government. In 1942, Brother William L. Dawson of Chicago was elected to the United States House of Representatives and became the first African American to chair a House committee. Alpha man Adam Clayton Powell joined Dawson in the House in 1945, representing the district including Harlem, New York. Brother Charles Diggs Jr. went to the House in 1955 and became the first chairman of the Congressional Black Caucus. And yet another Alpha carried this progress forward into the 1960s. A World War II veteran and graduate of Howard University and Boston University Law School, Alpha man Edward William Brooke practiced law in Boston before boldly announcing a run for Massachusetts Attorney General in 1962. No African American had ever been elected Attorney General of any state in the nation.
Here I was, as one newspaper said, a black in a white state, a Protestant in a Catholic state, a Republican in a Democratic state, and he's poor. And I pleaded guilty to all indictments. But having said that, I continued on in my campaign for Attorney General.
While proud of his groundbreaking election as Massachusetts Attorney General, Brooks saw it as a somewhat bittersweet triumph.
It might be an honor to be the first African American to ever be elected a state Attorney General. It was an honor. But it's a sad commentary when you think about the fact that it hadn't happened before 1962. Long after emancipation, with all the talent, legal talent that was around this country, the fact that I, in 1962, was the first ever to be elected a state's Attorney General, the chief law enforcement officer of the state, is a sad commentary for America, not for African Americans, but for America.
The fraternity's 21st General President and President of Wiley College, Dr. Thomas Winston Cole, led the Alpha contingent in the massive March on Washington, D.C., August 28, 1963.
This nation will rise.
Brother Martin Luther King electrified hundreds of thousands of listeners with his dream of racial equality and justice.
Thank God Almighty, we'll see it.
On July 10, 1964, the world showed its appreciation of Brother King's work. In Oslo, Norway, he accepted the Nobel Peace Prize as a trustee for the 22 million Negroes in the United States of America who are engaged in a creative battle to end the night of racial injustice. In Massachusetts, Attorney General Edward Brooke won acclaim with his success in the high-profile Boston Strangler case and for a record of tough action against organized crime. In 1966, after 2 outstanding terms as Massachusetts Attorney General, Edward Brooke won election as the first African-American United States Senator since Reconstruction.
Alpha prepared me for many things that I had to do. Helped me to think. Helped me to make right decisions and take right actions. And in this regard, Alpha Phi Alpha really has been with me every step of the way.
Edward Brooke took his seat in the United States at a time of intense political upheaval and unrest. President Lyndon Johnson tapped the new senator to serve on the Commission on Civil Disorders investigating the causes of the disturbances that rocked cities across the nation. This group took the lead in shaping the 1968 Civil Rights Act. As Alpha men made strides in the legislative branch of government, advances continued on the judicial side as well. Brother Thurgood Marshall continued his illustrious legal career, presiding as a U.S. Circuit Court judge and then serving as a remarkably successful Solicitor General under President Johnson. Marshall achieved the pinnacle of his field upon being appointed to the United States Supreme Court in June of 1967. On April 4th, 1968, the mounting successes of African American progress were overshadowed by tragedy. The evening before a planned march through Memphis, Tennessee, Alpha brother Martin Luther King Jr. was killed by an assassin's bullet.
I was present when Dr. King was killed. He was in 306 of Lorraine Hotel, and I was in 308. And I heard the shot ring out that killed Dr. King. And I looked around, and about 20 feet away was Dr. King's body back against the wall. I jumped in my car and went to the hospital because as an employee of the Department of Justice, I could get in my little old badge, and I got into the hospital, and the doctor looked me straight in the eye and said, "He's dead, Mr. Sutton." It was an evening that I could never forget. I knew Dr. King personally, and I knew of his role as a leader and his philosophy as a leader, and it struck me in a way that it still. No, it didn't dampen the spirit. The fraternity was greatly struck by the loss of this great black leader. And it just said to the fraternities the same thing it said to me, is that I cannot be deterred. We just had to and come up with a lot of black leaders. There was no longer the leader anymore. And there probably would not be a situation of the leader anymore, because history tells us that that doesn't occur too often. But it means that all of us had become more involved and more committed to the struggle. And that occurs every time there were demonstrations, and every time there were mass meetings, and you could find Alpha involved.
The assassination shocked the world. King's death was a terrible blow, but his Alpha brothers' courage and will to carry the fight forward would not be shaken. This determination and commitment were inherent in Alpha Phi Alpha's very spirit. The fraternity had lost a heroic brother, but it would not lose its way. Alpha's quest to improve life for all African Americans reached beyond the fight against legal segregation and prejudice to include direct efforts for economic progress.
I think Alpha got involved with the social issues, the economic issues of the country because of the condition in which black Americans lived. Poverty, poor public schools, poor education generally, housing, there's no decent, affordable housing available to them. When I was in the Senate, they had redlining. Banks would not give mortgages to African Americans who went into districts that had any whites in them at all. I was fortunate to get rid of that at the time. Very proud of that. But it was a necessity. It came about because that was the way it was. My father told me that if you pay more than 25% of your rent of your income rather for rent, that you can't afford to live in that particular rental unit. So I introduced legislation to put a maximum that no one living in public housing would pay more than 25% of their income for rent. It was called the Brooke Amendment. I'm proud of that.
The Brooke Amendment dictates that public housing tenants pay no more than 25% of their income on rent and mandates government subsidies to ensure that housing operating costs are met. Chapters of Alpha Phi Alpha also work to provide good quality housing in urban areas. Spread across the Opportunity Park area of southwest Akron, Ohio, the Channelwood Village housing development serves as a testament to Alpha Phi Alpha leadership in community improvement. Originally constructed to provide homes for low and moderate income families and the elderly, the genesis of this hugely successful project came in Akron's need for redevelopment in the area. A prominent judge in Akron, a member of Alpha's Eta Tau Lambda chapter, Brother James Williams, was instrumental in the project's conception.
In the late 50s and early 60s, Akron embarked on one of the most aggressive urban renewal programs in the country. 3 large developments, projects, whereby more than 2,000 units of housing was actually displaced. And as part of the plan for the urban renewal area was to rebuild most of that housing. And that was the impetus for Alpha to become involved.
The Federal Housing Act of 1963 asked nonprofit organizations such as labor unions, fraternities, and churches to get involved in building housing for low-income families, individuals, and senior citizens. Alpha Phi Alpha was poised to take advantage of this opportunity to work with government in improving urban living conditions. Aware of the need for such efforts in Akron, Eta Tau Lambda chapter took up the challenge. A $180 contribution from each brother in the chapter served as seed money.
I went to the Brotherhood, suggested that this may be a worthwhile effort on the part of Alpha, and we should take a look at it and see if it makes sense for us.
And I thought he had lost his mind. And first of all, it wasn't so much what he was saying that I didn't really like, but I was thinking, who in the world's going to loan some black men that much money to start a project? It had never been done before.
No one thought we were crazy. They thought we were maybe in left field. In fact, there were some of us who, we had nothing to do but gamble. That's all right. It was a dream, and if it worked, fine. If it didn't, well, we were right back where we started from.
After a while, and after talking to some builders and talking to other experts in the community, and after approaching the city to make sure that the land was available, we decided to proceed.
The chapter secured a federal Department of Housing and Urban Development grant of $11.4 million for construction, and groundbreaking took place on October 29, 1971. Construction went smoothly and was completed ahead of schedule, and formal dedication of the project took place on October 28, 1973. The centerpiece of the Channelwood Village housing development is the 277-unit high-rise Henry A. Callis Tower, named for the Alpha founding brother. Channelwood Village also includes 144 garden apartments and 130 magnificent townhouses, clearly a far cry from low-income housing. Following the success of Channelwood Village, Alpha expanded its housing in Akron with the 148-unit James R. Williams Tower and Charles H. Wesley Tower with 100 apartments. Outside Akron, Alpha housing projects include Lionel H. Newsom Tower in Alliance, Ohio. The growth continued to include projects across Ohio and beyond. With 17 properties in northeastern Ohio and 16 more throughout the state, Alpha Phi Alpha Homes operates and maintains more than 1,600 units in total. Additional projects outside the state include the impressive Alpha Tower Apartments in Chicago, Illinois, and the Alpha Gardens and Alpha Terrace developments in St. Louis, Missouri.
So our outreach is beyond Ohio. We believe that there's a need for housing all over the country. So wherever's a need, we try to go and assist that. We want to make sure that everybody has affordable housing.
The quality of work that's been done here is well known in many different parts of the United States. It has been a benchmark for the kind and quality of work that makes a huge difference in the life of a community.
We see a bigger role in being able to share our information, teach other chapters, and now other organizations that are out there that have seen what we have done. And I think we're best 40-year-old secret out there.
Eta Tau Lambda's experience in Akron has helped Alpha Phi Alpha chapters to sponsor housing developments across Ohio, in Chicago, Illinois, and in St. Louis, Missouri. Chapters in other cities are currently considering programs as the home ownership rate among African Americans continues to lag far behind that of white citizens. These programs are one way to move forward in closing the gap.
You see this really partnership between the private sector entity like the Alpha Phi Alpha Homes, Inc. and the City of Akron. Other agencies and organizations could use that model to really continue to improve the living conditions to provide, in particular, housing for residents. And I think that's their legacy, probably, is a good role model to have people see what can be done when they work together for the right cause, put together some innovative and creative people and let them work with government to try to make things better.
Having an organization like Alpha Phi Alpha that, one, helps to educate people about the needs of housing and credit and the things that will allow people to achieve home ownership, get into a home and stay into a home, are the kinds of partners that we always look to have at the Fannie Mae Foundation. In fact, we can't do anything alone, and we certainly can't help the many millions of families that need help with respect to getting into a home of their own. We actually do need partners like Alpha Phi Alpha and many other Greek-led organizations and other nonprofit organizations that are doing really excellent work in providing an opportunity for people to have a piece of the American dream. And so we're very proud of the legacy and the record of Alpha Phi Alpha in providing affordable housing, and always look for more opportunities to partner with the organization to figure out ways to improve the homeownership opportunities for African Americans.
In 1970, Ernest N. Morial, the fraternity's 23rd General President and first African American mayor of New Orleans, called on his brothers to strive for elimination of the ghetto. Alpha Phi Alpha worked toward this goal in many creative and innovative ways. As African Americans made progress in civil rights areas, the fraternity began implementing new programs focused on economic empowerment.
I think Alpha first introduced me to the concept that education is important, and that education leads to political empowerment, and political empowerment leads to economic empowerment, and that all three are very crucial. And if you read the history book of Alpha Phi Alpha, you will find that theme running throughout the history book, that Alpha many, many years ago determined that it was very important for young African American men to consume education. And then we had to move into the political mainstream. And of course, that leads to economic development.
We have had a social agenda to change certain laws for equal accommodation, equal housing, etc., voting. We have gone the civil rights route in terms of legislation, etc. Now I think is what we call silver rights, S-I-L-V-E-R, civil rights, which is the money, and economic development. And for the last 8 or 10 years, the fraternity has been moving very aggressively. But I think in the last 4 or 5 years, it has galvanized.
Economic development is the new civil rights movement. It's no longer a question of whether we can go to a certain movie theater or whether we can sit at the lunch counter in a drugstore or whether we can check into a hotel. You can do those things if you have money. But in order to participate in wealth creation in America and around the globe, economic development is the new platform. Alpha is leading the way in economic development. Men of Alpha are breaking barriers in every conceivable venue and are producing not only jobs, but the opportunity to network, the opportunity to provide vendor contracts, and it is the overall nature of that participation that will take us to the next level in America.
America is very much a capitalistic country, and we are all part of it. And I think that we have mastered education. We have mastered almost every facet of the American way of life. And of course, historically, we have had successes economically in this country. We've had very successful black businesses. One of them, probably the largest black business for a number of years, was Johnson Publication. And of course, John H. Johnson is a fraternity brother. We've had North Carolina Mutual Life Insurance. So we've had a number of success, quote, businesses over the years that happen to be black. But now we are more concentrated saying this is an important part of the Alpha agenda, business and economic development.
African Americans are being a lot more successful than they have been in the past, and from an economic standpoint. At the same time, there's still kind of the underclass, the less fortunate. And as those two extremes kind of continue to grow, how do we bridge the gap? How do we bridge that gap? And so I think one of the things that Alpha has always done has always been to look back and to reach and bring up, and we've got to continue to do that.
The fraternity has worked on numerous fronts for the elimination of the ghetto. Through housing development programs and entrepreneurship initiatives, Alpha has enabled African Americans to advance toward economic independence and success. Many prominent Alpha brothers have also contributed to this progress from positions within government. From the outset at Cornell University, Alpha's founders sought to promote African American progress through various avenues. Naturally, political participation and service in government have played an important part in these efforts.
And it was the time Du Bois and Frederick Douglass and the freedom movement was really at its peak. And we in some way were an outgrowth of that. Thurgood Marshall with the Legal Defense Fund of the NAACP, and Martin Luther King, and Maynard Jackson as mayor of Atlanta, Mark Morial as mayor of New Orleans, I was mayor of Atlanta, Dave Dinkins as mayor of New York, Kwame Kilpatrick as mayor of Detroit. We have been a politically activist group of young men.